We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H., and this week I am here with...
Curt G.
Yes, indeed, we have ourselves another guest co-host, another first-time guest co-host, and I do want to right away extend my thanks to Joe, who came in as our guest co-host last week. We had a lot of fun. I certainly enjoyed it. I believe he enjoyed it too, so hopefully Curt will enjoy talking with me this week. That's the hope.
Looking forward to it.
Excellent. So, yes, right away, why don't we get a short introduction of Curt? Let the folks at AVRant know who you are and what you're into with home theater.
All right. I am an enthusiast. Full stop.
Me too.
I don't have experience to speak of. My knowledge is just gathered from my enthusiasm and you guys, you and Tom. I've kind of become friends with Tom. I live nearby, and we had lunch together and met, and he said let's get together with our wives because I think they would like each other, and so we did, and we have several times since, and so yeah.
So I take it you live fairly locally, somewhere in Florida. It can't be too terribly far away.
I'm not far away at all.
I don't know. Do we have any salacious details? I mean, you're one up in me because I've never met Tom in person, despite talking to him all these years on this podcast. It's a ridiculous situation that Tom and I have never actually shaken hands.
Right. Tom is much nicer than you think he's going to be.
I like that. That's very nice. That would be the title if I weren't just calling this Welcome Curt.
But yeah, there you go. Every once in a while, you get the Tom rant going on, and which I look forward to because I find it hilarious. So
we aren't that different in real life than we are on the podcast. Ever so slightly heightened characters on the podcast, as you would
Absolutely.
expect. But no, I don't think you're going to be wildly surprised meeting either of us in person.
Absolutely.
Well, that is fantastic. I'm going to get through the welcome to the podcast stuff, get all that done out of the way, and make sure that we've hit all of those points. So this is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is email us. Our email address is question@avrant.com. There is, of course, our website, which, surprise, surprise, from our email address is avrant.com. Never might have guessed it, but that's what it is. You can see our show notes there. We have links to our Flickr albums. If I'm showing images on the YouTube version, then you can see the photos there and peruse them at your leisure. And then over on the right-hand side, you can donate to the podcast. It says support AV Rant on the desktop version of our website. So that is a way that you can help us out as well. Other ways to get in touch with us, as I mentioned, we are on YouTube. That is youtube.com/AVRant to see our whole collection of videos there. It's just two heads talking, like us two gentlemen here today. But, I do show some images. Sometimes having the facial expressions to go along with what we're saying can add a little extra context. So there it is, youtube.com/AVRant. We also are on some social medias. We have a Facebook page, facebook.com/AVRant podcast, and then I can be reached individually. My email is rob@avrant.com. My Twitter is @FirstReflect. Tom is tom@avrant.com, and his Twitter's actually shut down right now, not of his own choice. It got hacked, I think, because some folks ping me and they're like, I just got 20 spam messages from Tom's Twitter account. And then, now Tom's Twitter account is suspended. So that's really no point trying to contact Tom on Twitter. But we do have a third AVRant email address, which is lee@avrant.com.
Complaints.
Lee should be... Yes, by all accounts, should be joining me next week. We'll have our regular standby pinch hitter on deck for us next week. But yes, lee@avrant.com is where all of your complaints and those types of things should go. He's our customer service representative. So, Curt, is there a way for folks to get in touch with you? Or if not, that's okay too, because, that's you don't necessarily want to put yourself out there for the whole internet to contact.
Not really. I'm on Facebook. if you want to be a detective and hunt me down, you probably can. Just, if you look at Tom's friends, you can probably figure out who I am.
There's that. There's
so,
a way.
There
yes,
you go.
You can sleuth it out that way. But yeah, no, you're not a big onto Twitter or Instagram. Or
I
something
am
like
not
that,
on. So. I am not.
Alrighty. Yeah, I don't blame you one little bit. That's I'm not spending much time on those things anymore.
Oh man, I'm telling you.
No kidding. So why don't we jump down a bit? I'm going to just go ahead and thank our listeners of the week right at the top of the show to make sure that we don't forget to do it at some later point. So listeners of the week, of course, are people who support this podcast in some way. One of those ways that I mentioned is going to the website and clicking on the support AVRant cup of coffee logo, and that'll take you over to PayPal, where you can make a one-time donation or sign up to make a recurring donation of your choice amount if you want to via PayPal. So a person who did that I know about, because Tom didn't text me this week because he's a little bit busy with his family in Turkey right now. He posted some photos on Facebook if you want to see those. But yeah, last week's co-host, Joe, decided to go ahead and donate to this podcast through PayPal. So thank you a second time, Joe. Certainly not necessary, but he did so wanting to give a shout out to someone else that he's found very helpful in the home theater community, and that is avscience.com. They are a retailer. You might be like, AV Science, is that AVS Forum? There's a whole weird thing because they used to be, and now they're not. AVS Forum is its own completely separate thing. So it's avscience.com. They're a retailer. They do have a forum of their own, the AV Science forums, but that is not AVS Forum anymore. I've made it more confusing than it needed to be. AVScience.com is who Joe wanted to give a shout out to. He says, we, the AVRant, we've recommended them many times as a retailer, particularly for projectors. We always think it's well worth your time to give them a call on the phone. You will often get a better deal on the projectors that we recommend frequently from AVScience.com. We really like them for that. So in Joe's experience, they've always made things easy for him, including with replacement lamps and speaker upgrades, in addition to projectors, screens as well. So he's a fan. We're a fan. Happy to give them a shout out. And Joe, thank you very much for the financial support. That's awfully nice of you.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Another way you can support us financially if you want to is through Patreon. Our address there is patreon.com/AVRant podcast. You can sign up to make an automatic recurring monthly donation. The minimum is $1 a month, so $12 a year is a pretty good deal, I think, for this podcast if you want to support us that way. So we have 137 patrons over there, and Niels is one of them. He says he's been a patron ever since it first became possible to do so. So thank you for your long time monthly support there, Niels, and thank you to our 136 other patrons as well. And then some folks just support us emotionally, because Lord knows we could use that kind of support right now. So these are folks who just sent in notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through thick and thin, no matter what kind of strange legal, political fires going on in my area, horrible, whatever might be going on in the world. We've done a pretty good job of keeping this podcast going. So we got notes of gratitude from Nick, from Jay, who says he really enjoyed having Joe on the show as our guest co-host last week. I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy Curt this week as well. And having a little bit of a different perspective was something that Jay really enjoyed, even though he does like the usual Tom and Rob show. He appreciated that Joe and I went deep dive into some of the questions that we did there. So he had a fun time last week. And Niels also supported us that way as well. He said all the secret words that we've ever discussed at the end. So we know he is a true 2-hour plus club member. He listens right to the very end of our episodes, and we know that from the secret words that he sent in. He also says, thank you, meaning us, for our dedication to this podcast and its community over the years. And it has been our pleasure, Niels. So thank you, everyone, for your support. Your notes of encouragement are very much appreciated. So before we go any further, this is actually something I neglected to do with Joe, because we had a packed show with Joe. We went a half hour longer than we normally do, and we still didn't get to everything we wanted to. But one of the things I neglected to do, and we're going to have Joe back, if nothing else, than to get a rundown of what he had in his theater. So I'm not going to forget it this week. Curt, what do you have in your theater? Because the people need to know.
Absolutely. It's exciting. I have what I would describe as a budget home theater. It is a dedicated room, which is spectacular. About a 15.5 by 11 room. And a lot of the things that are in it I had already in my living room before I got the permission from the Budget and Aesthetics Committee to use the bedroom.
Nice.
And so yeah, I have a BenQ HT 3550. I originally had the 2050A,
Okay.
1080p, and upgraded fairly recently.
Nice.
And it is a noticeable upgrade, and I know it's not a,
it's not $10,000, but
exactly.
this is more along the lines of, hey, TV or projector, I don't really have to spend drastically more than a television to get a darn nice projector in the BenQ.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying it. I have a 100-inch screen that is was a very inexpensive buy on Amazon.
Okay.
And I think the brand name is IKEA.
Okay.
Who is like a spin-off of Elite, if I'm not mistaken. Elite
maybe.
Screens.
I'm not actually sure, yeah.
And let's see. I have a Denon X3600H. I have ELAC Debut 2.0 speakers.
Nice.
All the way around the ear level. LCRs and surrounds. The 6-inch in the front and the 5-inch on the surrounds. I have really cheap Dayton satellite speakers.
Okay.
For my front heights.
Yes, good choice.
And I couldn't even tell you. Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't even tell you what the brand, or what the model number is.
Okay.
Yeah, not a clue. But they were cheap.
You didn't spend $2,500 on some like ribbon tweeter speakers just for your front heights?
I did not.
How dare you, Curt? How dare you?
Yes, I thought Tom would be proud.
Yes.
And I'm using two old Energy Take Classic speakers for my rear heights.
Okay.
That I've had for Lord knows how long. And they work really, really well.
Yeah.
I always like those old speakers. And for my subwoofers, I have a Klipsch Sub 12 HG. That is a discontinued Klipsch subwoofer that is, in my opinion, far better than their cheap subwoofers these days. And an SVS SB1000 is my other subwoofer. And they match pretty well spec-wise, so we're good.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and that's about it. Yeah.
What are you doing for seating in your theater there?
I just have a reclining love seat, and then behind the love seat, I have a long table, sort of bar height.
Yeah.
And then two bar height stools.
No bouncing riser necessary.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's really only room for about 4 to 5 people in there.
Sure.
But that's fine. It's yeah.
I'll bet most of the time it's you and your wife, or perhaps even just yourself on occasion. That's very often what happens with our home theaters.
Very, very often.
So I do see you were kind enough to send in some photos. It looks like you've got sort of like blackout curtains put up all the way around your room. You mentioned this is like, it used to be a spare bedroom, so I'm imagining there's some windows behind those curtains.
There are, yeah.
Okay.
And lots of speaker wire. So
yeah. Curtains are a great way to hide speaker wire. I love it.
Fantastic. Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's great. I mean, yeah, I love theaters like this because this is the type of home theater where you can show it off to friends and family, to neighbors, and they will be impressed by it. It is unquestionable. They will definitely be impressed by your 100-inch screen, which I can guarantee you your 100-inch screen costs less than a 100-inch flat panel and still looks darn close to it.
Oh, yes.
And yet, when somebody asks you, oh, hey, like, how much did this cost, or what would it take for me to put this together? You don't have to tell them 6 figures. You don't have to tell them, like, the cost of a car. Like,
absolutely.
You could be like, this is not cheap. It's not pocket change, but it's like someone could reasonably afford this. And
absolutely,
I like that very much.
I do too. I recommend these particular things that I have to people all the time.
Right. Well, yeah, and because they're readily available too. That's another nice thing. You don't have to go to like some retailer you've never heard of and just trust the word of somebody else that like, oh, they won't rip you off or something. Like, you can just go to Best Buy or Amazon for a lot of those components and you like walk out of there with a heck of a nice setup.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Looks and sounds great. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this is going to lead into our regular What We Watch section, but what do you like to use for your source? Like, do you normally do streaming? Do you always play off a disc? Do you have a Kaleidoscape? Or what's going on that side?
I do not have a Kaleidoscape. Sorry, DJ.
Yeah. I think that would like cost nearly as much by itself as like everything else in your room. Pretty close.
I can almost guarantee that. Yeah. No Kaleidoscape. I go about 60-40 streaming over disc. If I'm gonna watch a movie, I would use disc.
Okay.
But my wife and I watch a lot of TV shows, and so I have an Apple TV.
Okay.
4K, and I mean,
let's be honest. When we're streaming off of the Apple TV 4K, like, there's probably the thing where you're like, technically, it's possible for things to look and sound even a little bit better, but I'm using these. I'm never looking at it and going, "Oh, I must change." It's like it's pretty darn decent.
Yeah, and the only thing, honestly, I don't notice that much difference in the picture.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't.
Mm-hmm.
Some weird blocking occasionally, but it's the sound where I really notice the difference.
But
I'll watch
something
something on the Apple TV, and then I'll switch to the disc, and I'll be like, "Oh, I'm staying here."
Okay. yeah, that is fair enough. That is something I wish, because I mean, even if they bumped up the audio quality all the way to lossless, like that still is a fraction of the bandwidth that it takes to send the 4K video, even though the 4K video is obviously much more data compressed than what you would get on a disc. Like you say, when everything is moving, it's pretty tough to like really spot the video difference. Like you've had a side by side maybe, but I'm not quite sure why we can't just a little more bandwidth to send it over the audio. Heck, compress the video even a tiny bit more and take it from there and give it to the audio. But
especially since it seems like that's the direction things are going.
Yeah, and I've noticed that like wildly different volume levels coming through, not even from service to service, but like I don't know what's going on with Disney Plus these days, but like from show to show on Disney Plus, I've noticed wild swings in volume. So that kind of stuff frustrating on the audio side. But I said this was going to lead into what we watched, so why don't we have a little bit of fun and talk about what we watched this week? Not too long, because we do actually have a full bevy of questions to get to. Let's have a little fun with that. What did you watch this week, Curt?
My wife and I finished Ted Lasso.
Okay.
Just one of our favorite shows. We just love it. We finished it and then started rewatching the entire series again.
Oh, nice.
But it's just hard. It's hard to find a show that's that good. And by good, I don't mean like quality necessarily. I mean, it's about kindness. And,
good-hearted.
And treating people with love and acceptance, and encouraging, healthy, good mental health, and it's so it's such.
Even though if you're watching it with kids, you have to be aware there is a fair amount of potty mouthing in it. There's a good amount of cussing, but it is very kind-hearted.
That's where I was going next. It's if you can handle the adult language.
The British accents help. When we're over in North America, for some reason, when it's people with British accents saying it, it doesn't sound so harsh.
That is a really good point, Rob.
I don't think it's the case for people over in Great Britain, but for us, we're like,
I agree wholeheartedly.
It's so charming when they're cussing away because they have the lovely accent to go with it.
Well, bloody is a curse word there, so
I guess so. Yeah.
I just saw Across the Spider-Verse yesterday.
Okay.
Fantastic movie. I mean, assuming you like the first one, it's kind of
sure. Fair enough.
If anything, it's even more artistic than the first one.
Okay.
Visually, it's fantastic visually. The backgrounds are so interesting to look at.
Definitely one you can watch many, many times and pick out something new each time.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask, did you find it Because one of the things that always gets me a little bit apprehensive about the multiverse movies or the ones that are based on existing properties that have lots and lots of characters and lore to them, did you find it overwhelming at times? Because that always gives me a little apprehension that I'm going to be like watching it and going, I don't even know where to look.
I can see that being an issue. It's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
I did see someone leave.
Oh, wow.
about a half hour into the movie.
Yeah.
And
although
not
we
sure
never
what that was about.
Yeah, there could be other things going on.
I admit there is an awful lot going on at any given time.
Sensory overload. That could be okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which doesn't bother me, but
right.
I can see how some people it might not be their bag.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really fun, and I know that it's being continued in the next movie. I didn't really expect quite as jarring of a cliffhanger as we got, but I'm there for it.
Nice.
And yeah, really good. My wife and I are also watching High Desert.
I have never heard of this, so please tell me about it.
Absolutely. This is an Apple TV Plus show. It stars Patricia Arquette.
Okay.
And it kind of reminds me, I don't know if anyone saw the show Poker Face on Peacock. Natasha Lyonne as basically a private detective, really good at naturally good at solving crimes.
She can tell whenever somebody's lying. Like a superpower. That's Poker Face. That's not High Desert.
Yes. High Desert reminds me of that a bit. Except it's an ongoing story instead of being a separate story every week. But it I'm trying to think of a good way to. I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it.
Okay. Without giving it away.
It's a little hard to follow.
Okay.
Just because it bounces all over the place.
Are they doing time jumps or place jumps?
No, just place jumps.
Okay.
But part of it is it kind of mirrors Patricia Arquette's performance because her character is bouncing off the wall.
Oh, okay.
She is a recovering drug addict who decides to become a private investigator.
I see. Okay.
And it's funny most of the time just because of her performance. Very good performance. Very, but I will be the first to admit it's a little hard to follow at times.
Okay. Well, hopefully it all comes together since it is serialized.
That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah.
But it's got a great cast. Brad Garrett, Matt Dillon. Yeah, it's very entertaining, mostly because of Patricia Arquette.
Okay.
So I'll give it that. And my wife and I watched the movie Tetris. On Apple.
Yeah, is that a documentary, right? That is a.
It is not.
Oh, it's not.
It is a dramatization of the attempts to get the rights to distribute the game Tetris, both on different platforms and in different countries.
Right.
And I'm sure it was watered down a little bit as far as how stressful it was to get the rights from Russia. They made it kind of almost humorous when I'm sure it was quite scary and dangerous.
Probably, yes.
Back in the
Cold War
this would have been back in the USSR days.
Yes.
So yeah, there was enough tension in it to make it entertaining and fun to watch, and I recommend it. All those things I recommend. All those shows I recommend.
You had a good bevy of shows. I only watched one thing this week. I watched Megan. That is the sort of billed as a horror movie. The robot, artificial intelligence, 4-foot-tall girl doll that befriends a young girl who loses her parents, and they form quite the unhealthy codependent relationship between those two. Megan spelled with a 3, by the way, in place of the E, because she is software, and that I really enjoyed this movie. It got a lot of praise and good reviews. I will say, It is in the horror genre. It is not exactly scary. It's much more in the, like, I was laughing at a lot of it, like not laughing at it as bad. Like, I was laughing because like the spooky little looks that the doll is giving and stuff. I was very amused by it. So I was chuckling at it because I was very much enjoying myself. But being in the horror genre, it does fall, like, in the very last act, in the very last moments, it definitely falls into some of the stereotypical horror tropes of how these things wrap up in the end. And so I can't say I love the ending because it did that type of thing. But if you know you're going into a not super expensive but looks really good, all the effects and everything in it are done really, really well. I mean, they focused on the Megan character and making her that weird, uncanny valley, creepy, sometimes a little too human, but sometimes very robotic. Like, they did an excellent job with Megan. So cool. that is what the movie hinges on, and they absolutely pull it off. The vocal performance of the actor who plays the character Megan, which they did like digitally alter too, quite a bit sound like GLaDOS from Portal. In some places, it's got that same distortion on her voice where it does the little weird like auto-tune glitch in places while she's talking. And but the vocal performance was fantastic. I bust out loud laughing at some of the things that she says. Again, like, not laughing at it, laughing because it was really well done. So I highly recommend Megan. It's not going to be something that's going to freak anybody out, so you don't have to worry about that. Yes, there's some violence, but not like crazy gore violence or anything like that. It's entirely watchable with, maybe not a super young kid, but entirely watchable with the whole family. So yeah, I really, really like that one. I can see why it got so much praise. There were some weird, if you're listening to it on a decent audio system, just to bring it to the home theater side of things, some very noticeable ADR dialogue replacement in places where I'm like, wow, okay, somebody decided that the script needed to change well after the recording, because that was like, you didn't make any attempt, because like they're in a room that has a little bit of reverb to it. So when you're hearing the recording that was done originally, and then it's like the ADR comes in and it's like the most flat vocal booth that you could ever have been in. And there's none of that room reverb in there. And I'm like,
my goodness.
You never did the background recording to get the room tone. You just mixed
Right, exactly. Yeah, well, so they were in a hurry, Rob.
And then they're like, well, since we got to replace the dialogue and we can't show the person's mouth shooting, we're just using the over-the-shoulder two shot, because that's all we're going to be able to
There you go.
So there was a little bit on the movie-making side, if you know something about it, where I'm like, okay, somebody got a little hamstrung in that scene. But other than that, no, the movie as a whole I very much enjoyed. So
great.
Yes, let's crack on. We've already a half hour into this thing, but we've got some news to cover, and Curt has very kindly said he's willing to read the news this week.
Absolutely.
So that's what I'll let you do.
All right. From David, some additional details and specifications about the micro OLED displays being used in Apple's Vision Pro headset have come to light. During a developer presentation, Apple confirmed that the default refresh rate is 90 hertz, but they are able to switch to a 96 hertz refresh rate when showing movies and TV shows that are using the standard 24 frames per second, allowing for perfect frame rate matching without any judder. Because 4 times 24 is 96.
That's right.
Apple said there are more than 23 million pixels total, with more pixels than a 4K display per eye. Interesting. Analysts have now pegged that as approximately 3,800 by 3,000 resolution per eye. And each raw pixel can generate upwards of 5,000 nits. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Although due to the lenses and display driving methods, significantly less than that actually reaches your eyes. Nevertheless, early hands-on reports have mentioned being able to look at your iPhone screen through the headset without any over or underexposure being noticed. So the high dynamic range capabilities of both the front-facing cameras and the internal displays seems to be up to the task. It is an interesting mix of manufacturing companies, all being utilized by Apple to bring the Vision Pro's displays to market. TSMC, the semiconductor manufacturer, and manufacturing the silicon backplanes that control the micro OLED pixels. That's a handful of a sentence. That micro OLED front plane uses white micro OLEDs with color filters, all of which is manufactured by Sony. And the OLED display on the front of the headset that's used to show other people a video feed of your eyes, that's made by LG.
Yeah.
It's a team effort.
No kidding. So yeah, kind of interesting. I mean, it somewhat explains some of the price that's going into this thing too.
Right.
Because I mean, we know Apple, they don't sell their hardware at a loss. They intend to make a profit on their hardware as well. So people are like, yes, rightly bulking at $3,500 for a mixed reality headset. Most expensive that has. I mean, I don't even know if they're truly targeting it at consumers. They called it Vision Pro. That sort of like implies that in the future there might be just a regular Apple Vision or an Apple Vision Air or something like that that'll come in at a lower price point. Right? They put that Pro on the end of the name like they do with their MacBook Pro or their Mac Pro desktop computer or their iPad Pro. And they're like, yeah, that's meant for people who are willing to pay more to get some features that most people don't really need or use. So we'll charge the extra price there because we expect to sell fewer of them. So I don't blame them on that front. But yeah, when they're having to go to a minimum of 3 different display manufacturers and get them to all work together and then assemble all that. Yeah, so quite a bit going on there, but interesting. The whole thing with those micro OLEDs, because that's a bit of a new thing. We haven't seen a lot of that. The idea there is that with the regular ones, regular OLEDs that we've been used to, the display manufacturers are it's a display manufacturing process that isn't miles away from the way LCD panels were manufactured. You've got this mother glass that's there, and through an electrochemical process, all the little OLED subpixels are like deposited. We've talked about how they're trying to get like an inkjet printing system for OLEDs, but we still don't have that at like full commercial scale. With the micro OLEDs, it's a semiconductor backplane. We're going to chip manufacturers like TSMC, not display manufacturers. Because I mean, this is not for a television, all right? This is not going to be something, although they said theoretically you could scale it up to like wall-size stuff, but I mean, it's meant for these teeny tiny little displays going into headsets and possibly onto phones and things like that, or watches, right? You could envision something like this being on an Apple Watch at some point with exceedingly high resolution and high dynamic range coming out of your Apple Watch. But yeah, the idea that the backplane, it's more similar, if we're going to like previous manufacturing technologies, it's more similar to liquid crystal on silicon, where there's like this reflective backplane layer that's controlled like a microchip, and that is what is sending the electrical signals to all the little OLED pixels. So it's interesting that we're like fusing all these different technologies to create something new this way. But I'm blown away that the raw pixels themselves can generate like 5,000 nits, because when we're talking tiny, like these are micrometer. That's the micro in there is not a lie. Like this is really tiny, to generate that much light it kind of blows my mind. But there we are. Hooray, technology.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, next. It appears that Samsung will be adding an 83-inch model to its S90C series of OLED TVs this September. But there's a twist. Samsung Display, the manufacturing arm of Samsung, as opposed to Samsung Electronics, the consumer electronics arm, is only making 55-inch, 65-inch, and 77-inch quantum dot OLED panels that are currently being used in both of Samsung Electronics' S90C and S95C series of QD OLED TVs. To add the 83-inch size, Samsung Electronics is buying WOLED panels from LG.
Yeah.
For LG Display. So this is a different kind of OLED panel technology. LG's WOLED versus Samsung Display's QD OLED, and yet they aren't separating it into its own series. That said, LG Electronics has a somewhat similar situation when it comes to their current G3 series of OLED TVs. The 55-inch, 65-inch, and 77-inch models use LG Display's newest WOLED panels with micro-lens array technology, but the 83-inch model lacks MLA, or micro-lens array technology, so it isn't as bright as the smaller screen sizes. Naturally, the 83-inch OLED TVs coming from Samsung won't have MLA either, and putting them into the S90C Series, S90C Series.
Hey, Tom would have screwed that one up too, man. He loves those ones.
Way before I did, yeah. Indicates they are intending to compete on price with the LG C3 series, most likely.
Yeah. So, Vincent Teo actually put out a video about this too, and he was like, we saw from Korean news that Samsung Electronics is purchasing from LG Display not just 83-inch WOLED panels, also 77-inch WOLED panels. And the Samsung Display does already manufacture a 77-inch quantum dot OLED. So he's like, are we going to end up with like the S90C 77-inch being a panel lottery where you don't know whether you're getting the quantum dot one from Samsung Display or the WOLED one from LG Display? I don't think they would do that, and there has been no announcement along those lines. Basically, the news here, because we did hear about Samsung Electronics going to their rival LG Display and buying WOLED panels only in the larger screen sizes, but it was a surprise that the 83-inch version is going to be coming out this year. All anticipation was that we wouldn't see any WOLED panels from Samsung until 2024. So they have accelerated this to bring this out. So that probably explains why they're like, okay, we're not going to create a whole new series. We're just going to be like, this is the 83-inch version within the S90C series. We know it's not going to have micro lens array because even LG doesn't have that in their own flagship at that screen size. So I think in 2024, we likely will see some kind of delineation. Maybe it'll be a S85D series that'll be the WOLED panels and only the larger screen sizes, and then we'll have a S90D and an S95D that use the quantum dots or something along those lines. I anticipate that they aren't gonna aim to potentially confuse their customers that much by having two versions of the 77-inch within the same series. I don't think that's actually going to happen, but who knows? That's pure speculation on my part. But Samsung's smart enough in business. I don't think they'd quite do that, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Next, Perlisten will be releasing their S7T limited edition tower speakers for a mere $30,000 per pair.
That's right. And they only come in pairs. You cannot buy signals.
change.
You can't make this into your center speaker. They're like, nope, you're getting them in pairs. $30,000.
Pocket change.
That's right.
Only 50 pairs will be made.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it is limited.
Very limited.
Yeah.
And each pair will be hand-matched, certified, and signed by the company's CEO, Dan Romer, in a process that takes a full workday for each pair. Hence the very limited run.
Yeah.
The whole notion began as a simple idea of offering Perlisten's flagship S7T tower speakers, which are $10,000 to $11,000 each, depending on finish.
So this is, $10,000 more for the pair. It's because of $20,000 to $22,000 for the regular S7T. It's a limited edition, $30,000. So it's $10,000 more.
Wow. With a carbon fiber finish on the cabinets.
That's right.
Wow, that's interesting. But once that cabinet design began, they decided to throw every upgrade they had been toying with into a new offering.
Yeah.
They're still using HDF cabinets, but that HDR...
Oh, so that should be HDF,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
You
but
know me,
HDF...
I put HDR, HD, and then another thing. I put that HDR
Right.
in the show notes. No wonder Tom messes up from time to time. That's right.
But that HDF is laminated to a carbon fiber outer layer that increases stiffness. The increased rigidity lets them slightly increase the internal volume by 8% by bowing out the sides, forming a curved shape without increasing the footprint of the speaker at all.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. That increased internal volume allowed them to utilize some upgraded bass woofers to their fullest with increased excursion. A redesigned voice coil mated to an all-copper heatsink on the back of the magnet allows the S7T Limited Edition to produce 1 to 2 decibels more output below 80 hertz versus the existing S7T towers. And aesthetics-wise, all of the mounting screws are now completely hidden from view.
Oh, people complained so much about that. They're like, these are $20,000 a pair of speakers, and if I take the grills off, I can see mounting screws? People were upset. So they're like, okay, for $10,000 extra, we can fix that. We're gonna visually hide all the mounting screws now.
People need to get a life. To go along with the increase in bass output, Perliston's trademark DPC, which is directivity pattern control. DPC. Perliston's trademark DPC waveguide for the beryllium tweeter and 2 mid-range drivers was upgraded to a milled aluminum material that acts as a heatsink for all 3 of those drivers. And again, no mounting screws are visible. Thank God.
That's right.
Okay.
It was the most important thing.
The base and outrigger feet were upgraded to a thicker, heavier machine steel construction, and custom isoacoustics anti-vibration feet come standard to decouple these limited edition towers from the floor.
Now, I anticipate complaints, because if there's one thing people who buy $30,000 per pair of speakers want, it's spikes. Whether they're good or bad for performance, people want those spikes. So I anticipate that Perliston is going to have to provide spike feet for these things, even though I actually agree with them. From a performance standpoint, I would much rather dampen decouple the connection from the bottom of my speakers to the floor. I would much rather have these decoupling feet, but there you go. I'm warning Perliston. I'm like, this is going to happen, guys. You're going to get complaints that these didn't come with spikes.
I'm with you, Rob. All of the changes resulted in a redesigned crossover as well. But despite all of it, Perliston isn't actually changing the specs versus the existing S7T in any particular significant way. They're not identical, and extension should be a little deeper with 1 to 2 decibels higher output capability across the board. But the spec sheet figures aren't being altered and are sticking to the same THX Dominus rating and certification.
So there you go. They're not even going to claim on the spec sheet that these are better.
Yeah.
but they're like, well, we didn't do it for absolutely nothing. You should get a little bit deeper bass extension, should be a little bit more output, particularly below 80 hertz. They really emphasize that below 80 hertz, the new woofers that they're putting in there, the slightly larger cabinet volume, the heavier bass plate, the stiffer cabinet, all of that does lead to a measurable, 1 to 2 decibels greater output, particularly in the bass. But yeah, they're not even going to try and sell it specs-wise based on that. This was more about a finish option at the beginning of it. And like, well, this finish option is going to require us to increase the price. So if we're going to do that, why don't we just throw everything we've been thinking of into this thing, particularly the hidden screws. Oh my goodness. So vital. So I think that is it for the news. And we did have a comment, which I will just quickly cover here. That came in from Colin. He actually heard Will's question from last week. Will was asking about outdoor speakers, and Colin wanted to weigh in. So Will was asking if there's like a waterproof portable speaker that specifically works with Amazon's voice assistants, but can use that particular voice assistant, the A-Lady, to control Apple Music. So it was like, okay, the specific use case that Will wanted. Will had previously used Amazon's Echo devices, but they didn't survive the outdoor setting that he had them in. And then he got the Ultimate Ears Mega Boom, but after a firmware update, they took away the ability for the A-Lady voice assistant to control Apple Music, even though it came with that out of the box. So that was very annoying to Will, and understandably so. So I wasn't able to provide a simple, hey, go buy this. It'll do everything you want, because I was under the impression that all the portable smart speakers out there that aren't Amazon's own, that they were similar to the way that the Ultimate Ears was, and that the A-Lady voice assistant wouldn't work with Apple Music.
Right.
But I did mention that I caveated that with that I might be wrong about that, and according to Colin, I am wrong about that. So Will asked about the Sonos portable speakers, the Move and the Roam. Colin says he can vouch for both of them as being rugged and waterproof, so they will survive the outdoor environment. Great for a pool party, which Will mentioned is something you want to use them for. Yep. And with the smaller of the two, the Roam, he says that sounds good. It's very portable, very easy to use. The larger Move model sounds even better, but he actually thinks it's quite hefty to carry around, and it does have a charging base, which is the only way to charge it, and that cannot be kept outside, the charging base. So he's like, just, have a think about that the Roam might actually be the better choice there for a pool party. So in Colin's experience, the Sonos speakers can still use the A-Lady voice assistant to control Apple Music. You do need to set all of that up in the Sonos app first. So you can't just take it out of the box and immediately start using it. You do have to go into the app first to authorize the Apple Music service to work with the Sonos speakers. But once that's done, Amazon's voice assistant should work with Apple Music for the most part. Colin says that simply saying play Apple Music after you've woken up the voice assistant, that seems to work fine. Asking it to play a specific artist or a specific song seems to work fine, but for some reason, asking it to play a personal playlist that you've created doesn't work. That, in Colin's experience, that part of it isn't working. So that might be an issue because you might go to a pool party, you've created a playlist, and now that doesn't work with the voice assistant. That might be annoying. Seems there is a little bit of a limitation there. As I mentioned, Sonos does have their own voice assistant, Hey Sonos. And Colin says that he's found that it also has trouble playing Apple Music's playlists just using the voice commands. So unfortunately, that isn't any better. And teaching your guests and family to say, hey, Sonos, instead of waking up the A-lady, then apparently that isn't going to be the fix there. So he mentions if you have an iPhone, the Sonos speakers can use AirPlay. They'll also connect to any phone via Bluetooth. So if your guests just want to use a phone, you can control the Sonos speakers that way. It doesn't have to be the voice assistant. So there are other means of getting your playlists to start besides the voice assistant that, don't require you going inside the house or something, as long as you have a phone out there with you. So hopefully Colin is hoping that'll help out Will and anyone else who was thinking about a similar setup. But yeah, I'm crossing my fingers that there is no future Sonos firmware update that goes and takes that away, because that would be frustrating. But it does seem as though using Amazon's voice assistant with the Sonos speakers might be worth a try to Will. So different from the advice that I said there. And hopefully Colin is right about that, because that would be nice to be able to say, hey, just go get that and it'll work for you.
Yep. Great.
So it is question time. Yeah. As I left off at the end of last week's podcast, we did have some that spill over into this week. So we're going to hit them up. Curt is going to go ahead and read these questions for us, and we're going to dig on in.
All right. Nathan is trying to help out a friend with a whole house audio setup. They've got 5 pairs of in-ceiling speakers in 5 different rooms. Each room has a passive volume dial installed on the wall, and all of the speaker wires home run back to a central location. Nathan brought over a little Class D amp just to test all the speakers and connections, and everything seemed to be working fine. Every speaker played, and the volume dials in every room worked as expected. That's great. Mm-hmm. So they went ahead and bought the cheapest 6-zone 12-channel distribution amp they could find on Amazon. A $330 unit from a brand called Technical Pro. It says it's 6,000 watts.
You're not getting that out of a wall outlet, so something's going on there.
Sure it is. Immediately after hooking it up, the sound was cutting in and out, and the left channel in all 5 rooms stopped playing entirely. Apparently, they're not technical pros. Nathan went through some troubleshooting with them. They swapped RCA source cables, swapped left and right channels, made sure the balance control wasn't accidentally moved. No dice. The left channel was dead in every room. Later, he connected to a regular bookshelf speaker with a pair of short speaker wires directly to each output channel to test the amp, and all the left channels were dead.
Yeah. So just to clarify, this is inside a stereo amplifier. It doesn't magically have, a ton of different channels going on there. Mm-hmm. So I'm talking connection wise, right? It does have 12 separate outputs, but in terms of where is all the power coming from, they're sharing a common power source. So it's not, in fact, it would be weirder if one of the 12 amplifier channels didn't work and the other 11 all did. That would actually be stranger in this case. The fact that just all the left channels don't work, kind of, there's obviously a problem in the power supply for all the left channels inside of this thing.
Yep. So, should they try a return and replacement through Amazon, or should they just get a full refund and buy something else? There's a 4-zone, 8-channel pile distribution amp for about the same price. It looks beefier in terms of build quality, and it's a better known brand name, but it only has 4 zones, so one of the rooms would potentially be left unused. What do we think is the best course of action, and is there another distribution amp option, hopefully under $500, that might be a better choice altogether? And it looks like maybe there's something from Dayton that...
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just mention that normally when people are asking me for a whole house audio multi-room distribution amplifier, I do typically point to Dayton. Their MA1240A, that is 12 amplifier channels, 40 watts per channel, and it does actually hit that spec, so they aren't like fudging that to be, cute or anything like that. That is real, but it is $630 brand new, so it is over the budget that was talked about. Does have all the features and everything they want, and I would vouch for the MA1240A from Dayton, but it would go above the budget. That said, it's available from Parts Express open box right now for $504, but with free shipping, so I don't really think that's like drastically going over the budget so much that we would care too much about that. So that is just one, like, if you had said we haven't bought one yet, what would you recommend? I don't want to spend too much more than $500. I would point you to one of those open box Dayton MA1240As and just get it from Parts Express so you get the lower price with the free shipping. So that was sort of my answer. Therefore, is there something else I would point to? In a situation like this, it's like Technical Pro, Audyssey, it was one of those things where just reading the description that they put on Amazon, I'm like, okay, clearly translated from another language, but also B, like the specs just don't make sense. Like it was a grab bag of numbers that I think they just randomly assigned to this thing. So there wasn't really much useful information I could glean about that Technical Pro amp. Now, that doesn't mean, obviously you just got a bum unit. There's no question about it. Like I say, internally there's two, amplifiers, one for the left, one for the right, and the left one is broken on the unit that you got. So, exchanging it just for another one, in all likelihood, as long as you get one that's functioning, it's gonna work just fine to do what you need it to do, and at a price that's, a couple $100 less than the $500 budget. There's always going to be that thing in the back of the mind, right? How long is it going to last? I would not anticipate any sort of warranty like coverage actually coming through for you on that sort of thing. So, the other option that you talked about, going with the 8-channel, the 4-zone Pile amplifier, which, Pile, well known for lower cost, but well-known brand name. Their products do typically work absolutely fine. I've never really had any beef with any of the Pile Pro type of products like that. So this is a case where, well, you definitely could still use this to drive 5 zones. It's just that 2 of those zones would always play together, right? You would just wire 2 of the zones in series together to one of those amplifiers. So if there are 2 rooms in the house that you're like, oh, I never play them separately, I always have those 2 zones playing together, then you could still do that. But if you want full 5-zone independent control, I don't know. Myself, I would maybe lean to the one that I already trust, which would be the Dayton, which, you get the open box version that does fit within the budget. Yeah. So I think you got multiple solutions there. I don't really think you have a genuinely bad choice out of any of those options. Yeah. And hopefully that's sort of enough info for you to go, okay, weigh those considerations and pick a direction to go.
Yeah. All right, let's charge on. Jack, where's the best place to order a replacement lamp for an Epson 5050 UB projector? Projector Central. Is it worth tracking down just a bare bulb and keeping the current lamp housing? No. Or better and easier just to order the entire housing and bulb replacement? Yes. Yeah. So.
Actually, yeah. Why don't we ask you? Have you done this with either of your BenQ projectors yet? Replace the lamp?
I have, and I went to Projector Central and put in the model of my projector, and it comes up with 4 or 5 suggestions of places to buy. You just check them and take the least expensive one.
You can do that, yeah.
It worked for me, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. I always recommend, if I don't already know a place to point someone, Projector Central 100%, because they have a pretty darn extensive database. Yes. I suppose we can't say literally every projector that's ever existed is guaranteed to be in there, but if they don't have it, I wouldn't expect someone else to, and Projector Central to not have it. They've got a well-researched database. So yeah, you plug in your projector model, they will give you a list. And you can do it, you can set your country as well. This isn't US only. Right. You can set your country if you're in a country other than the United States, and they will give you resources for that as well. So two that I always like in the US, and they will absolutely work for an Epson 5050 UB replacement lamp, are Pure Land Supply, which is going to show up in that list that Projector Central gives you,
Yes,
or
it is.
My Projector Lamps. My Projector Lamps I like as a Canadian because they have a Canadian outlet in Canadian dollars with shipping from Canada, and I don't have to worry about any sort of import fees or the stupid brokerage fees that FedEx or UPS always want to charge at the border when they bring anything in for no particular reason other than to pad their bottom lines. So that is one of My Projector Lamps. They have a .ca version if you're Canadian like myself. Quickly looking through there, as of when we were recording this, because the prices sometimes fluctuate, but at the moment for the Epson 5050 UB, projectorlamps.com, myprojectorlamps.com had it for $110, and Pure Land Supply had it for $129. So there you go. You might do that. In this case, given those price points, I absolutely would get just what they sell, which is the housing and the bulb. I don't think, is it possible to get a bare bulb? Yes, it is. Do you save any money at all? Yeah. Tens of dollars, but then there's just the amount of time and care that you have to put into. Now, there are instances where the entire, like I'm talking other projector models, other replacement lamps, where the housing and bulb are, $700-800 or something like that, and getting the bare bulb is like $200 or $300. So in those instances, if the housing is still good and you're up to the task and you're willing to be very careful, wear cotton gloves. Absolutely do not let any sort of oils get anywhere near that bare bulb while you're handling it. Put the care in, be very careful with it. Look up a YouTube video on how to replace exactly in your housing and bare bulb and do all of those steps. In those sorts of instances, I could see if you're very price conscious. Oh yeah, that's several $100s. But when you can get the whole bulb and housing for $110, I'm like, I don't even think it's worth, like, if you paid yourself for the amount of time it's going to take to transfer the bare bulb into your existing housing and remove the bulb that's already in there, of course, I'm like, you'd have to pay yourself minimum wage or less, and I just don't think it's worth it at that price point. So it's so darn easy when you get the whole housing. That is like, you just take off the lamp cover on your Epson 5050 UB, you pull the old one out, you put the new one in, you put the cover back on, and you're ready to go. It can't get much easier than that. It's plug and play. So for $110, that's the way I would go.
All right. Shawn, assuming either would physically fit, do we have a preference between the Monolith THX satellites at $250 a pair versus the SVS Prime satellites at $350 to $400 a pair? Which is better? What are the pros and cons of each? My initial thought is that, whereas if you A/B them, you might think the SVS maybe sound a little better, but maybe not $150 better.
Well, that's always the question,
So,
right? Yeah,
and I like the form factor of those monoliths. The cubish look of them. Yeah,
they are. Although, as I always warn, when you see them in pictures, you're like, "Oh, those are some cute little 2-inch cubes." No, they are not.
They're
those
bigger
are
than that.
4.5-inch drivers in there. These are basically 6-inch cubes.
Yeah.
So the thing is, yes, the Monolith THX satellites are definitely much more of a cube type shape. They really are like a 6-inch cube. The SVS Prime satellites are more rectangular, but width-wise, they're about the same. They're both about 6 inches wide. The SVS Prime satellites are taller, and they are ever so slightly deeper. Not drastically so, but ever so slightly. So they are a physically larger cabinet. But he said, assuming either would physically fit the situation, just, and obviously, I'm assuming he's willing to pay the money. Like he's not saying it has to be the cheapest, otherwise decision already made. Is there a sound quality difference between the Prime satellites and the Monolith THX speakers, or other pros and cons that would essentially justify paying the extra for the Prime satellites? So I think the main difference I would point to is the Monolith THX satellites. They are THX Compact certified. They really are limited in their output.
Sure.
They are, by their own specs, low sensitivity speakers. They're closer to 80 or 81 decibels with 1 watt going into them. That's low sensitivity. And obviously, given the price point and the physical size and the constraints there, don't have like 2,000 watt power handling or something where you can overcome the low sensitivity just by blasting it with a gazillion watts, which would be a weird mismatch of price of speaker versus amplifier to begin with. So, I mean, these are very much output limited speakers. Now, for a small room, for a desktop setup, which is what they're certified for. The THX certification is for like a desktop setup. That's the intended output. They can hit full reference volume when you're 3 feet away from them. They can't do it so much when you're 10 feet away from them. That said, as like overhead speakers, where, yeah, your top middles, if they're these, they're going to be 5 feet away from you. You can absolutely use the Monolith THX satellite speakers in a, smaller sized home theater as your overhead speakers. I would have no problem using them there. And their form factor might be a little bit more convenient. They have just a very simple keyhole mount on the back. You can attach that to a swivel mount that can attach to a keyhole if you want to. But the SVS Prime satellites also just have a keyhole mount on the back, or they give you the option of removing that to put a wall mount that you screw directly into the cabinet of the speaker. You don't have to use a keyhole converter with the SVS Prime satellites. So the main one is the output capability. If you have a medium to large sized home theater where your overhead speakers are going to be 10, 12 feet away from you, I would probably output alone err on the side of going to the SVS Prime satellites, because you don't want to run into a situation where you're, getting into distortion or just not getting the output that you want and need. So that alone. Measurement wise, yes, the SVS Prime satellites, they measure a bit flatter. They have a bit more bass extension. I would not worry one iota about bass extension for Atmos speakers. That really doesn't matter to me. So honestly, I would put most of it just on the pure output, on the sensitivity on the output. This is also a case where if you have slightly more sensitive floor level speakers, I wouldn't necessarily want to match them with the Monolith satellites, because you might run into the situation where the trim level on the satellites is turned all the way up and the trim level on the floor level speakers is close to all the way down, and you still can't get a perfect volume matching, which the volume matching I do care about. I want that. So I think there's things to consider there. Basically, I like the form factor of the THX satellites from Monolith. I like the price. They're very convenient. In a small room, I'd have no problem using them. But once you get medium to large size room, I would pay the extra $100 or so to go for the Prime satellites. In pure out and out, let's say he's using this in a desktop setup and he's just like, do one of these sound better than the other? Subjectively, I would lean towards the Prime satellites. Again, I think a lot of it just comes down to, the bit more bass extension, which this is one of those things. We'll actually be talking about this whole topic coming up with some of the future questions. But when you're doing subjective listening, I don't know if I can underplay how much a little bit of extra bass extension and output completely changes your subjective feeling about the entire frequency range of a speaker. Because when I see people describing speakers as bright, which I see all the time, or people even describe amplifiers and preamplifiers as bright. I'm like, nope. I mean, yes, there are such things as genuinely bright speakers. That does exist, but I see a lot of speakers that they don't measure as having some kind of obviously tipped up treble. What they do measure is the difference is their speakers they were coming from had a tipped up mid bass, and then they went to a speaker that had a flat mid bass. And the speaker that had the flat mid bass, even if the treble is equally as flat as their older speakers that had a tipped up mid bass, suddenly the new speakers are bright. And it's like, it's not that they're bright, it's that the mid bass and the bass, it plays such, we can't get away from it. Even if you know about it, we can't get away from it psychologically. It completely alters our subjective experience of any speaker. So if these are going to be my front, left, right speakers, I would err on the side, again, of getting the SVS Prime satellites, just having that greater output capability, having the greater mid-bass extension. Because, I mean, the THX satellites, they spec them to 80 hertz. They're 120 hertz. You got to cross them at 120. They're outputting sound at 80. It's not as though there's no sound coming out, but they are not flat to 80. Those THX satellites are not flat to 80, whereas the Prime satellites are flat down to like 95, 90. Anybody like, what difference could that make? It makes a significant difference if you're using them as your front, left, right speakers. So there you go. My leaning in a lot of cases would be the SVS Prime satellites. But if you're like, nope, I'm putting this in a 10 foot by 12 foot bedroom and all I'm using it for is my Atmos speakers, I'd probably save the money and get the THX satellites.
Yep. Depends on use there, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Nick. Nick has had a Denon X3600H receiver for a while, as have I. He thought about getting the Audyssey editor app, but he already thought everything sounded great the way it was, just running Audyssey Multi-Q XT32 from the receiver itself. And while the editor app isn't expensive at $20, he just didn't see what use he'd actually get out of it. But now he's bought a second Denon receiver, so first, is he allowed to buy the editor app just once and then use it for both of his Denon receivers? I would think yes. When I do this, I have the editor app.
Okay.
It has me choose the receiver.
Yeah.
And whereas I've never had more than one to choose from, I don't think it would ask you to choose a receiver if you could only have one. So
Indeed. Yes, you absolutely are allowed to buy the app editor app once and then use it for multiple Denon and Marantz receivers.
Right.
So as Curt can tell you, you have to have your phone or tablet that you're running the editor app on and your AV receiver both connected to the same network.
Correct.
And I don't know if it's actually in the manual, but the recommendation is out there. Like, if you can hardwire the AV receiver while you're doing this procedure, probably so much the better, because if there's any sort of Wi-Fi glitch that occurs while you're doing the whole thing, you have to start from scratch with Audyssey, unless you're using the desktop software, the $200 desktop software, Multi-Q X. There's no way to like do one speaker at a time or go back and remeasure just one speaker with the editor app or running it directly off your AV receiver. It's the whole shebang, all the speakers, all the positions. So that can be a bit frustrating. So like, hey, if you can just hardwire while you're doing this, that's usually the rule of thumb advice that goes on there. But other than that, if you have both of your AV receivers connected to the same network as your phone or tablet, then you can choose which one that you're running it on. I mean, another clue is the editor app doesn't have you input any sort of serial number or something like that. So it's just a matter of choosing which one on the network. There is a difference when you go to the Multi-Q X desktop software. And that's probably where this question came from, because you probably heard a little bit about that. With the Multi-Q X software, it is that one piece of software for one owner for one receiver or pre-pro. And they do have you input the serial number, and you have to be connected to the internet, and they have to authenticate it. And if you try to use that same Multi-Q X software, you buy a new Denon or Marantz receiver and try to use that, it won't let you because you have to input the serial number.
Yep.
I said from the beginning, I think that's a little bit foolish on the business side, because don't you want to encourage people to stick with your brand when they buy their next AV receiver? But they're basically like to offer it for the $200 price point. And with the Multi-Q X software, they have like committed to every update that comes out. They're never going to charge you for an update. It's like you buy the software once, it's good for you, it's good for that one AV receiver, but it's good for life. So, that sort of way they're coming at it there. The advice with the Multi-Q X software is don't use your email address to sign up with it. Create a new email address so that there is the possibility you could sell it to somebody and then give them that email address along with it, and then they could keep using the Multi-Q X software that you already purchased. That would be a nice add-on for the next owner when you sell it, and that would help you recoup potentially some of the costs so that you could buy it again for your next one. But the editor app is much less expensive and much easier on that side of things, and you don't have to worry about registering.
Yes, and I will say I've always just done it Wi-Fi. I haven't hardwired my receiver, and I've had zero problems.
Yeah.
Okay, what would he actually use the editor app for? He's seen the recommendation to curtain off the EQ, so it's only correcting up to the transition frequency of the room, about 200 to 300 hertz. But is that really a big benefit? And what else could the editor app do for him that might actually be worthwhile? Just kind of the tone of his question, how he says he's happy about how it sounds. I wonder. I mean, it is only $20, but if you're really trying to decide if it's completely worthwhile, it might not be.
Well, I mean, what do you use it for, Curt? Because you say you have it, you've run it. What have you used the editor app for?
I run Audyssey with it. I've played around. If you're a tinkerer,
right?
If you like to fiddle around with settings,
yes,
then yeah, do it.
Yeah, for $20, yeah.
For $20,
you can have a little bit of fun. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. I've played around with the curve editor.
Sure.
Just see how this sounds.
Yeah.
And after you take your readings, you can set your crossovers right there in the app and
yes,
change them if it has set your speakers to large. You can change it to small before you send it to your receiver. But
have you, Curt, done the experiment that Tom and I have done of turning that mid-range compensation, the 2 kilohertz mid-range compensation dip that's in there? Have you tried it on versus off?
I have.
Okay.
And I noticed nothing.
Oh, what do you know? That's 3 for 3.
Shocking, isn't it?
3 for 3. If you're like,
yeah.
The measurement actually, you go back and measure with Room EQ Wizard, and you're like, oh, there was like a little 2 decibel difference in there.
Yeah.
Can't say I've really ever heard it.
Yeah.
But, so yeah, there you go. I mean, that's one of the things. The people who hate that by default, when you run it just off the AV receiver, there is this 2 kilohertz dip in there. Like I say, measurable, usually shows up as about a 2 decibel drop around 2 kilohertz when you measure it after the fact. So some people hate that. They can't stand that it's there in their graph, or even just knowing that it exists. So you can turn that off in the editor app. That's worth $20 for you. I mean, predominantly what I would recommend the editor app to anyone who's interested in it is for the curve editor, because I mean you just cannot do by default. You are given a choice of 2 target curves by default. There's the flat setting, which Audyssey, when they say flat, they are targeting flat. That is what they're targeting. And there's all kinds of debate. Again, future question, we're going to be getting into some of that, but all kind of debate whether you actually want to target a flat response or the Audyssey reference response, which they developed through subjective lessening, right? They had a group of people come in, basically tune the dials as they were listening to things until they thought it sounded right. And that is the Audyssey reference target curve. And those are the 2 choices you get by default. When you get the Audyssey editor app, you can draw your own, and you quite literally are drawing it with your finger, which is why some people will say, oh, better to do it on a tablet because it just gives you a larger surface to use your finger on, or, get a stylus that works with your touch screen to get a little bit more precise, but you quite literally are drawing your target curve. If you do that, one nice thing with the editor app is the measurements are taken first. Then you do your choice of how I'm going to change things for the targets, which means you have the option of you don't have to do the measurements again. You can go back to one you already did inside the editor app, draw a new target curve without having to measure again, save that as another upload. And now you can upload to your AV receiver through your network from your phone or tablet, different ones without having to measure over and over and over again. So if that's something you're interested in, that can be easily worth the $20 because, there really isn't a way to do it by default. But, that can be well worth it. So that's normally what it is, because a lot of people very much like to have some extra bass, which, Audyssey, one of the criticisms of both of their default target curves is that they don't put a rise in the bass, which a lot of people either think is correct or they just plain want it. That's just what they prefer, and I have no beef with that. So you can go ahead and draw that in the editor app. You can't have that from one of the default target curves. And you can do it without just the global turn up the subwoofer pre-out where everything the subwoofer is playing got equally louder. You can actually put a slant in there, a slope, so that the lowest frequencies get relatively louder than the upper bass frequencies, that type of thing. You can draw all of that. So those are the main things. The whole thing about curtaining off the upper response, I mean, that is a debate. All right, so the prevailing wisdom these days, and this is coming from Harman, right? This is coming from Floyd Toole, and this is coming from Shawn Olivan, people who have really, really researched this stuff.
Right.
Now, a lot, and I might end up repeating some of this because I know we've got questions coming up to deal with this too, but a lot of what they were doing, we've talked about this before, they did in a lot of their studies, took their JBL Pro M2 mastering monitors, which they know from having measured those in multiple anechoic chambers, measure virtually ruler flat the entire frequency range. They can then bring that speaker into multiple different rooms and measure what that speaker does. No equalization being applied or anything like that. Measure what that ruler flat anechoic speaker does in a bevy of different rooms, and then show in their AES papers what the response is in a real room, and then draw the average, which is this sloping thing that we've seen, this so-called Harman speaker target curve in a real room, which, I mean, it's not that drastic. It's like 1 to 2 decibels per octave as an overall slope. And then depending on the room, very much depending on the room, because you see this average that they've drawn, and then this quite large gray area on either side of that average, which is depending on your room, more or less deep bass boost. Generally speaking, the smaller your room, the less bass boost you're going to see in there, and the larger the room, the more bass boost you're going to see, just sort of generally speaking. So all of that is descriptive, not prescriptive. They weren't saying this average that we've drawn is what you should target with your equalization system. This is like, if you don't equalize a ruler flat speaker, this is what it does. Now, where some people say, well, it should be, your equalization target is, in their listening tests, where they had a group of listeners listen to a bunch of different speakers in a regular room, some a little more heavily treated, some almost treated not at all, and no EQ applied to the speakers, subjectively, the listening group in general, and there were outliers, there were always outliers, so it's not as though literally every listener agreed on this, but generally speaking, there was a preference for anechoically flat speakers. So they're like, okay, so we've got the two sides of it, right? We've got, you take what we know is just a signal in, signal out speaker when there are no room reflections, you put that in a real room, and you end up with this sort of average rising response down towards the bass. Then you take people just not knowing what speaker they're listening to, but they're listening to a bunch of different speakers in some heavily treated, some not so heavily treated rooms, no EQ applied, and subjectively they prefer the speakers that measure anechoically flat. So that's where the sort of online community has said, okay, well, doesn't that mean our EQ should like target what that anechoically flat speaker just inherently measured like in a room? So they're saying if and only if your speaker measures anechoically flat and, in Harman's research, wide, horizontal, even dispersion, all right? Not strange reflections coming off your wall that don't match the on-axis response. Very uniform horizontal dispersion. If you have all of that, then they don't recommend equalizing the treble. I come around to the other side of it, which is, okay, if we go into a room that doesn't have great acoustics, and we take any speaker, wide horizontal dispersion or not, and you measure from seat to seat, you'll get some pretty non-uniform response from seat to seat in the mid-range and treble. So if you're measuring in multiple microphone positions like you do with Audyssey, and you end up with non-uniformity, it basically doesn't do anything. It's like, from seat to seat, I'm getting non-uniform results, so I can't EQ what's going on here. If I do, because Audyssey takes a spatial average, right, all these different positions, and if I go and EQ that, then it's going to make one seat way worse while I'm making another seat better, and you end up with it not really doing anything automatically anyway. On the flip side, you have a well-treated room with very uniform dispersion speakers, and you do get good uniformity from seat to seat. Well, then you can EQ it, because you're not going to make one seat worse while you simultaneously make another seat better. So it's been pointed out that, like, okay, if you don't want to alter the character of your speakers, you bought these speakers because you have some emotional attachment to the way they sound, and you don't want to alter that with EQ. Okay, go ahead and curtain it off. Don't alter their mid-range and treble sound. Or if you go ahead and try to automatically EQ the treble, you might make some seats worse while you make other seats better. That can be true if you only take 3 measurements and they're all really close to each other, which some people like to do. They're like, I really only care about the one seat, so I'm only going to take 3 or 5 measurements and they're all going to be really close to each other. And now my other seats got significantly worse than this one seat. But then if you only care about the one seat, and then if you care about a wide seating arrangement, it's really going to be either you have uniform response, in which case EQing is okay all the way up in a treble, or you're going to have non-uniform response, in which case having the auto correction do what it can is also okay because it's not going to do anything. So this ends up going just back to my personal experience with it. I have never bothered curtaining off the response. Because I'm like, either it's not going to do anything automatically, or it's okay to do something automatically, and I'm not the person who's going, I don't want to touch the character of my speakers. Because if the interaction of the speaker and the room in some mid-range or treble frequency gave me a hump or a dip that anechoically wasn't there, if I have uniform response, I want to correct that. So that's my take on it, that I haven't ever had a problem letting it EQ the entire frequency range. I get the argument, and I think it's predominantly for the people who are taking clustered measurements, and then they're like, oh, now look what happens, so I'm going to just curtain it off. Again, going back to like that mid-range compensation dip, how much you end up genuinely hearing any of this stuff in actual content? I know. So, yes. Curt, have you ever tried curtaining off so that only the bass is being EQ'd?
Never. No. I mean, honestly, I do. I kind of feel the exact same way about it that you just described. I'm happy. I'm not that picky. I'm happy. I'm happy with the way it's say. If it sounds good when I'm done, I'm happy. I'm good.
There you go.
Let's just go with that.
Yep. And if you're even more anal retentive than that, which I will put myself into that category, but not to the point that I drive myself crazy with how it looks on a graph versus how it sounds.
Yeah.
Then you end up like me playing full frequency sweeps.
Yeah.
But being willing to say, okay, like I will tell you right now, if I go and measure all 13 speakers that I have in my stupidly tiny little home theater, if I measure them individually on the graph, they don't look perfect. I promise you that. On the graph, they don't look perfect. But when I play a full frequency sweep through any of the speakers that I care about, which is honestly just the 5 that we were originally used to, it sounds like there's no big hump or dip, which that's all I'm going for. Yeah. I just don't want any big, there's clearly some hump or dip going on at this frequency range. I don't want that. And if it's there, I want to EQ it, which means I'm going to EQ above the bass. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. And looks like there will be a link to a site that will kind of show you what Audyssey is all about.
Yeah, if you've never used the editor app before, there is some opinion into the link that I've got here, which some of it I agree with, some of it I don't. But just in terms of step-by-step showing you how to use the editor app, I thought this was a nice little guide. You can just look at the pictures and ignore the words if you want to. So if you've never used it before, this just sort of shows you the nuts and bolts process of how you go through using the editor app. So I will have that link for someone who might need it.
All right, into the new questions. Jack says, ouch, rough review of the Aperion Veris 3 Concert V8B bookshelf speakers from Aaron's Audio Corner. Aaron mentions that during his listening tests that he conducted prior to measuring the speakers with his Klippel measurement system, he heard a mid-bass scoop that took away the meat from the vocals. How do you quantify the meat? And he also heard some high-frequency sibilants and resonant peaks that he sometimes found grating unless he towed the speakers out quite wide so that he was sitting well off axis. That's interesting. Aaron praised their aesthetics and build quality, their low distortion, fairly deep bass extension, and wide even dispersion. But he pointed out that the vertical dispersion is very narrow, right at the crossover region between the tweeter and the woofer. And he pointed out some off-axis non-uniformity at a certain at certain treble frequencies that would make the speakers difficult to EQ to address those specific shortcomings. Something's making noise in here.
Oh, no, I'm not hearing it over here, so I think we're all right.
Good. We've often said of Aperion speakers that they're quite neutral in general, but the 8-inch Veris 3 concert series is newer and an update to the Aperion Veris speakers that we used to recommend more frequently. So, is this a case of a new design being worse than an old one? Would we shy away from these particular Aperion speakers based on what Aaron pointed out in his review?
So I'm showing just some screen grabs. It's got Aaron's face down in the corner, so you know that's where these came from. We'll have a link to his review, of course, because we don't want to be stealing anybody's content. That's not the idea, and I'm not recreating the whole video here. But I mean, so first of all, the ouch rough review analysis that came from Jack. That wasn't necessarily what Aaron's saying. Aaron wasn't like overly hyped about these speakers. I don't think he was like overly down on them either. So I don't necessarily agree with the ouch that this was a particularly rough review. Yeah. Because I mean, Aaron, I like Aaron's reviews quite a lot, right? He does his subjective listening, then he measures after that, and he shows you the measurements. He does some explanation about what those measurements mean and what they indicate. And that's about it. It's a pretty straightforward and fair review process. And I quite like Aaron's reviews. So the debate, if there is any overreaction, that's coming from his audience and not from Aaron himself. It's like he'll even say, he's like, it's pretty rare that I tell you buy this speaker or don't buy this speaker, like either direction. He doesn't really like to do it. He's like, if there's something like wrong, like this is a thing that the manufacturer needs to go back and fix because it's an error. It's not just like, oh, I subjectively preferred it or whatever. Like, you know, he'll mention that, but that's pretty few and far between. So yeah, the review itself, nobody come here and say, oh, you're either bagging on Aaron or praising him to the moon. I'm like, he's pretty down the road. I like the way that he reviews speakers. So what I will say is the measurements, and maybe he didn't say this explicitly, so I will on his behalf, because I don't think he's going to disagree. The measurements, everything that he took, and in particular, like, okay, he's got this on-axis linearity response, right? And I like the way that he shows it, which is he puts this gray area, which is plus or minus 1.5 decibels, and then this blue area beyond that, which is plus or minus 3 decibels. And guess how the speakers are specified in their spec sheet? They're specified to plus or minus 3 decibels. From a frequency range that, okay, by his measurements with his Klippel system, it didn't get quite as low on the bass end. The specs, I think, said 30 or 35 or something minus 3 dB, and it didn't quite get that low. And then I think they spec'd it all the way up to like 35 kilohertz or something like that, minus 3 dB, and it didn't quite get that high either. But through basically the entire usable range of this speaker, it fell within spec. There's nothing here above or below plus or minus 3 decibels, right? Now, that's a lot of speakers, right? The most of the speakers we see are specified to be plus or minus 3 decibels over whatever frequency range that they give. A lot of them, when you measure them, they don't. They go beyond that, right? There's going to be some frequencies where they're plus or minus 5 or 6 or something like that. So just by were they lying to you on their spec sheet, like, quite flatly no, other than I say, yeah, okay, it didn't get down to 30, it didn't get up to 35, but I'm not super worried about that. That's not the reason you're going to change anything. So he was talking about this subjectively. He thought some of the meat in the vocals was missing, and that was his word that he used in the review. You can watch it for yourself. And he thought there were some of these peaks in the like 3.5 kilohertz, 4 or 5 kilohertz range, which, visually you can kind of see like some ups there, but I would quibble with the word peaks.
Yeah.
Like, again, they're within plus 3 decibels. Yeah. So here is where it gets a little tricky, because if through the whole listening range, something is 3 decibels quieter in some areas and 3 decibels louder in some areas, that's a 6 decibel gap. That is audible. Okay, I'm not going to say that isn't audible. And that's why you can have a bunch of different speakers all telling you that they are essentially flat plus or minus 3 decibels through similar frequency ranges. And yet when you listen to them, even if you tightly control your listening conditions, they don't sound identical. that even though they have essentially identical specs, because there is this tolerance of plus or minus 3 decibels across most speakers that we see, they don't all sound identical, and you can hear differences, depending on what content you're using to listen to. One of the things, and I mean, this is me just, I don't know, ribbing Aaron a little bit, but I think he would fully agree with this. He's not doing blind listening tests, all right? He knows what speaker he's listening to. He is listening to one speaker at a time, following those, Harman guidelines for if you're gonna be able to hear a difference between speakers, you probably have to limit it to mono, because even once you get to stereo, people have difficulty telling even speakers apart. But it's like, he knows what speaker he's listening to. It's funny because if you compare his reviews to Audio Science Review, they also use a clippable measurement system over at Audio Science Review. Like, over at Audio Science Review, Amir, he just hates, and he doesn't make any bones about it, concentric drivers. He's just like, I don't like concentric drivers. I'm not exactly sure why, but he just doesn't like them. So when he tells you his subjective opinion of a KEF speaker, he's like, there were all these problems. And then he points to his measurements, which look really good, but he's like, you see how there's this little squiggle here? That's what I was hearing. Obviously, that's what I was hearing. Well, Aaron quite likes KEF speakers, like just sort of in general. And again, the measurements are the same. So he's like, yeah, no, look at these measurements. They're pretty predominantly flat, and it all sounds pretty good. It's like, wait, your measurements were the same. You had wildly different subjective write-ups about them, but both of you knew which speakers you were listening to. Right? So it's like, okay. And this is where, going back to the previous question I was talking about, like, I've seen Aaron describe quite a few speakers as bright. Some of them, the measurement, it's like, you go to that plus minus 3 dB thing, up in the treble everywhere above 4 kilohertz, they're like 6-7 dB above, the medium plane. It's like, okay, that's a bright speaker, and absolutely everything backs up about it. But I've seen him subjectively say, because he does a good job of separating the subjective from the measurements. He's like, this is what I heard, and then here's what I measured, and I'm going to try and correlate some of it, but I'm not going to say this is exactly why, these things go together. And it's like, I've heard him describe some speakers as bright. The measurement doesn't show some wildly tipped up treble, but it does show a boost in the mid bass, right? Like, I see that all the time. And it's like, Aaron is an experienced listener. He knows this stuff. Right. It doesn't matter. You can't get away from it. Your brain won't let you. And on the sighted listening side of things, even if you're like, I'm not going to prejudge these speakers. I don't care what brand they came from. I don't care what they look like. I don't care what the driver design and layout is. I'm aware of all that stuff. I'm not going to let it affect my subjective opinion. No one on earth can do that.
Yeah.
Everybody's subjective opinion gets affected by things, even if you make a conscious effort not to let it. It happens. It just happens. That's the psychoacoustics of it. And you're not lying when you say it, because you're not even aware of it. But you can't get away from it. So one of the things that I kind of chuckle, and I think Aaron would chuckle about this himself, is that on the human side of things, if he's like, this is what I heard subjectively, and I wrote down my notes. I noticed this in the mid-range. I noticed this in the bass. I noticed this in the treble. I noticed this about the clarity. I noticed this about the off-axis dispersion, whatever it was, all the subjective stuff. Then he looks at his measurements, and like, you can't help it on the human level unless it's wildly different. You're going to kind of look for, this is what I wrote down I heard subjectively. And then, I saw in the measurement this squiggle. It's 2 decibels, but I saw a squiggle right where I heard something. That's got to be the reason. And it's like, if this was fully blind conditions, I kind of question whether you'd really be able to point to something that's 3 decibels out, which I grant you, in lab conditions, we've established is like perceptual to humans. But this is not some 8 dB peak where you'd be like, well, you kind of got to really be not paying attention to notice it all. This is kind of like, I heard something, I see a little something, those 2 things must go together. And he's pointing out how in particular, right around 4 kilohertz, there's this lower section, which is like, that is the listening window response, which is that uniformity I was talking about. That's an indication of, if that line is basically like just a flat upward trend below the plus or minus 3 decibel window, if that lower dotted line is like just a flat trend, that means that it is very uniform, at least horizontally, meaning you could EQ it really effectively, right? Any change you make is going to affect all seats pretty much equally. And he's like, okay, right around that 4 kilohertz range, we see this dip. Again, not gigantic. I've seen way worse dips than that, but it's just an indication that there is like, that's like a differential indication going on there, saying, okay, you change it in one seat, it's not going to be the same response in other seats, showing the off-axis response where, again, I'm like, okay, the general shape as you go 15, 30 degrees off-axis, it's not a flat line, but the general shape isn't like wildly different from angle to angle. So there's nothing about these speakers that I like, falls out of spec. They weren't lying to you. Are they the best speakers ever made? No. Like, not if what you're aiming for is anechoic linearity. Okay, they're not. But, like, this is not an ouch review. I will just flatly disagree with that, right? And this is going to be a case where, okay, if you really care about, I'm only going to EQ speakers that are completely uniform all the way up into the treble, well, you might have a little difficulty right at 4 kilohertz. But, like, everywhere else, it was kind of okay. And like the horizontal dispersion is really quite wide and even. There's some limited vertical dispersion. So, okay, maybe you also need to have a rug on your floor. There's, that going on there. He's pointing out this sort of hole in the response vertically below the speaker, right at 2 kilohertz, which can be noticeable in a floor bounce. Like, all of this stuff is very reasonable. None of it is particularly ouch worthy. And then he's like, yeah, it's got low distortion, right? Crank these speakers up and they stay nice low distortion. So, yeah, that's my analysis of his review. I don't think this is a speaker where you're like, oh, you got to avoid it. It's also not going to be a speaker where like, well, it blows away everything else that exists anywhere around its price point. It's like, that's a pretty reasonable speaker that hits its specs. Yeah.
All right. Karl. Both Karl and his wife E, we've heard from them before, work at organizations that have already planned to purchase several Apple Vision Pro headsets. So he'll be able to report firsthand experience once they arrive.
Yay!
That's cool. But during the WWDC video presentation, that's what, the Worldwide Developer Conference?
Yeah. Apple specific.
Apple, yeah. They both couldn't help but feel a bit saddened by the way every use of this new spatial computer was depicted. Every person shown using the device was physically all alone, or, quote, shutting out the world, unquote, until someone got close enough to them to fade into their view, say a few words, and then fade away again at the moment they left. Even if you only use the Vision Pro to watch movies and play games, do we really want family members in our households all separated even further, being right next to each other but not actually present? Ooh. Put on our face masks, all do our own separate things, and only see digital representations of each other's eyes when we're talking face to face. It all just feels kind of sad and lonely and even a bit scary. What are our thoughts?
Open-ended question, so I will let Curt take the lead on that one. How does that all make you feel?
It's kind of an interesting point. I can see where, like, friends would really have fun getting together and doing this together. But for families, I kind of see their point. Is how much different is that than where we are now with the cell phones, though?
Looking at your phones, yes, yeah. I mean, parents obviously limit screen time sometimes,
sure,
right? They're like, okay, you can only be on your tablet for this long. You can only be watching TV this long, only using your computer this long. I mean, I don't think initially there's going to be a ton of parents buying a $3,500 Apple Vision Pro for their
kids.
That's
a good point, yeah.
I mean, there will be some, and eventually the prices will come down, but I don't think it's going to be like super quick. I mean, I guess he's like, we're extrapolating this to the Ready Player One future, right? Everyone goes back to their teeny tiny little apartment. Everybody puts on their headsets. I mean, you extrapolate that further. Eventually, we're all going to voluntarily put ourselves into the Matrix if we keep going down that line of thinking, right? Okay, all you need is a pod and a thing that plugs directly into your brain, and off we go. We don't have to worry about what the real world is like. I see both sides of it. Like I said, I think I'm actually kind of a little bit more optimistic than I expected to be.
Yeah.
And then I've seen a lot of other people criticizing it. I mean, look, not like Apple invented headsets. So it's always kind of funny to me that, I mean, people accuse Apple of being the ones that come out 3 years later and say, we invented this thing. And yes, there has been some of that in their presentations. But I think the tech criticism audience has done that even more than Apple themselves have honestly done. I don't know. I mean, like everybody has pointed out, this is not Apple's endgame. Right. This is not what they envision as the mixed reality future. They don't want it to be ski goggles. Tim Cook is on record saying to have mixed reality be a real thing, it's got to be no more than a pair of eyeglasses. Like maybe with a little bit thicker frames, but like it's got to just be eyeglasses that you can see through. People are seeing your real eyes, not a video feed of your eyes. And you're just using it where we basically use our phones already. Like it would just be useful to have this information present, but I don't have to look away. I can look at you, or I can look at what I'm looking at, the real thing in the real world, and then have useful information about what I'm looking at brought up right in front of my eyes without having to do anything else. This is their first step on that path. There's a I don't know if Apple would readily admit, but there's a bunch of compromises they're making based on currently available technology. They can't do the pair of eyeglasses yet. They just can't. Even though they're Apple and they have all the money in the world, they can't do it yet. It just can't happen yet. So ton of compromises that they're doing in here. But I don't know. Like what they showed on the airplane, right? I'm like, okay, people already aren't talking to each other on the airplane. Yeah. And the fact that somebody actually can easily get your attention if you're using this versus some of the other things that people do on airplanes. I'm like, it's actually kind of better that they fade into your view. Like that's, I don't know. I don't have the nearly pessimistic take on the Vision Pro that I've seen other people say. I don't necessarily think it has to, like exactly like Curt just said, right? We're already distracted by other things. We can already be sitting in the same room as a family, but doing different things. Yeah. That's not new. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not as pessimistic, Karl. I think it's all right.
Yeah, tend to agree. All right, on to Matt. Matt has a 75-inch Sony X900E LCD TV. He got rid of the large shipping box that it came in a long time ago. He's going to be moving, and he wants to know the best way to make sure the TV will be protected inside the moving truck. Should it always be packed vertically? Does he need to pay for one of the specialized TV moving boxes that has foam in each corner? Most of the standard TV moving boxes say they're only for TVs up to 75 inches, so he'd have to get one of the extra large ones, right? Is it honestly needed and worth it? Yes. I mean, you spent some moolah on that TV. I'd do whatever to protect it if I was moving.
Yeah, and I mean, like the ones that just U-Haul sells so readily available to pretty much anywhere. Like it's $40 for the extra large size. Yeah, and that's this, sort of expandable box, but tall enough that it fits up to an 86-inch television, so your 75 will fit. And then it comes with the foam for the corners. Like I'm like, so I mean, here's my firsthand experience with it. I've moved several times, but I've only ever moved in town. One day move, short distance. Right. I've either rented a truck myself and done it, or hired a small moving company when I had more stuff. And I never used one of these specialized boxes when I did those short in-town moves, right? Now, what I did is I always put the base of the TV that came with the TV. I attached that because I often use a wall mount for my TVs, but I attached the base. I didn't throw that away when I got it. And then, we put one of those padded moving mats down on the floor of the truck. I put the TV right on the floor of the truck. I put one of those I wrap some plastic around the screen so that the padded moving pad is not directly touching the screen, but I put some plastic around the screen, and all the movies have those, gigantic rolls of the cheap cellophane that you put around there, and then put one of those padded moving pads over the TV, and then put other moving boxes around it so there's no chance it's going to tip over. And when I'm only going a few miles and staying in town and doing it all within one day, I've never had a problem moving one of my TVs that way. So if that's your situation, I can tell you from first-hand experience, you don't need to buy the specialized moving box. There are absolutely ways to do it. If this is a cross-country move or an out-of-state move and you're going to have like a full semi-truck, like moving type of thing, I would pay the $40 in a heartbeat. I would easily pay the $40 in a heartbeat. And yes, you're going to end up recycling that specialized box when you get to the other end or selling it to someone else who's doing the same move. But, like, it's not so drastically expensive. So that would be mine. So I can see someone saying, okay, you don't have to. I have used it, not used them for the short moves, but for anything longer than that, I'd pay the $40. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
Should mention, should it be kept vertical? Yes, it should be kept vertical, if at all possible. Because, look, there's only kind of two options, right? Either something else is going on top of the TV if you lie it horizontally, wouldn't want to do that, or the TV is going on top of something else if it's lying horizontally. I wouldn't want to do that because there's some chance it could slip or slide. So, I would keep it vertical.
Absolutely. All right. Infinite Gary. Hey, I get an Infinite Gary question.
You have to. I searched high and low. It was so difficult to find
sure
an Infinite Gary question to put on the list.
They're at such a premium. Infinite Gary. Gary enjoyed the discussion that Rob and Joe had last week about the newest IMAX cameras and film stock and how Christopher Nolan put them to use when shooting Oppenheimer. Gary would like us to continue the discussion, but turning our attention to what happens for the home release. First, obviously, we aren't using actual 70mm IMAX film projectors at home.
Maybe there's someone in the world who is, but it ain't us.
Sure ain't us.
It ain't us.
We're going to get Oppenheimer on a disc or via a download or streaming. What impact does originally shooting the movie on 70mm have in terms of how it will be offered and experienced in our homes?
And I guess that's, versus if it were shot digitally.
Yeah.
Or just shot on film, but at, not the gigantic 70mm film stock. So, look, so the bottom line is it's going to be digitized. It was digitized anyway, right? Christopher Nolan likes to do a lot of stuff in camera, but it's not as though the movie is completely devoid of any digital effects. So it was digitized. Let's get that out of our head that it somehow remained analog the entire way through. There was an analog to digital and a digital to analog conversion to show it on physical film in IMAX theaters. For the 30 theaters that can actually still show it in physical film, there was an A to D and a D to A conversion in between there because there are digital effects in this movie. So anybody who's like, just keep it analog the whole way through. No, that doesn't exist for this movie. So, I think it's a similar thing that I mentioned last week, which is just, I always agree with capturing whatever you're working on at the highest quality resolution beyond what the finished product is going to be, capturing it at the highest quality that you can, because that just gives you more artistic freedom to crop shots, to track shots digitally after the fact, to manipulate the image, right? When you start with as much raw data to begin with as you possibly can, you can shrink it very easily. It's much more difficult to take something that was limited in the camera and digitally expand it to something that just was never originally captured. That means you're making up data that the camera never captured. Shrinking it, much easier.
Yeah.
So what effect does it have for the home release? Well, it is Christopher Nolan. He has enough sway that I think, at least on the disc, we will get changing aspect ratios. That's becoming less and less common, but I think on the disc release, we will get the changing aspect ratios. We will not, we've never in the past on his movies actually gotten the 1.43 to 1 IMAX aspect ratio, right? They've still cropped it for our TVs and made it 16:9, which is, 1.78 to 1. It's wider than 1.43 to 1. So I predict that's what the disc will be. I think the streaming services, when it comes there, are just going to be 2.35 to 1 the whole way through, because portions of the movie are. I don't think they're going to have changing aspect ratios on the streaming version. I'm just basing that on history, right? That seems to just be the way it is. And there is a constant 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio version of this movie that already exists, because most of the theaters in the world aren't IMAX.
Yeah.
Most of the theaters of the world are showing a constant aspect ratio version, and I'm pretty sure that's what we're going to get from streaming and downloads. So if you want the changing aspect ratios, I think we're going to have to go to the disc, and being Christopher Nolan, I think we'll get that. So does it mean the movie's going to look better than any other movie? I'm like, no, not really, because again, we're actually shrinking what was originally captured, but there's many stages other than just what the camera captured that determine the final image quality. Christopher Nolan, again, cares enough and has enough clout that his movies tend to look pretty darn good on the home release because he actually cares.
Rob, how do you feel about film grain? I notice 70 millimeter things that were filmed on that. I usually notice film grain. I personally love it.
Yeah, my whole thing is I only ever want to get as close to whatever the original movie was.
Yes.
So if it has no grain because it was completely shot digitally and all artificially created, fine. I want to see that. If they change the aspect ratios, I want to see that. Like,
yes.
I don't like that the home releases often don't have the full experience. Right now, of course, there's the flip side, which is saying in order to get people to come out of their homes and come to the theater, we have to give them an experience in the theater that they cannot get at home. And I get that on the business side. I understand that. But no, if the movie was shot on film, it's going to have some amount of film grain. Like the 70 millimeter IMAX film is pretty darn low in film grain. It is. Yeah. It really doesn't have very much there. In fact, what you're seeing on the film presentation through the projector is always going to be less pristine than what was recorded because being physical film, it degrades every time they play it.
Right. So
in that sense, I want what was originally created. That's all I care about.
Yeah. All right. Being a Christopher Nolan movie and already knowing Oppenheimer has switching aspect ratios, as we mentioned, we can probably expect switching aspect ratios on the disc release, right? Yeah, I would think so. Gary uses a 2.35 to 1 aspect ratio projection screen in his main home theater. He's blacked out everything above and below the screen, so he knows there is light spill, but it's never been a problem for him. That said, might it be possible to select a fixed aspect ratio? He'd rather just watch it in 2.35 to 1 all the way through. I wouldn't think so on the disc.
On the disc, I mean, again, we're just basing it on history, right? Yeah. I haven't seen that as an option before. I mean, technically, because there's seamless branching available on discs, on a technical level, there isn't really a reason why they couldn't, like they just plain couldn't offer it if they wanted to, but I don't think they want to. That seems to be
right.
Because every time there's a new deliverable, there's a slightly additional cost to offering that. So, I mean, here's the thing: are any of the streaming or download services, save for Kaleidoscape, going to have truly equal image and sound quality to the physical disc? And I would still have to argue no. So if you want the absolute best quality that we can get at home, you're going to want to get the disc or the Kaleidoscape version. Kaleidoscape might offer a 2.3 because they are very heavy into the anamorphic crowd.
It's true,
it's not out of the question that there could be a 2.35 to 1 all the way through version from Kaleidoscape, but I certainly can't guarantee that. That's up to them whether they offer that. So I think if there's going to be highest audio video quality possible and no changing aspect ratio, it would be through Kaleidoscape. That would be my guess. But if you're like, I'm perfectly happy with the Apple Movies version of it on the quality front, I would suspect that one will just be 2.35 to 1 all the way through.
Yeah. All right. And more from Infinite Gary. Tom and Rob have talked many times about always just wanting to have 16:9 aspect ratios. And one of the reasons given is that any home releases with a changing aspect ratio can always just be shown pixel for pixel that way. Mm-hmm. But any changing aspect ratio means black bars, of course. So obviously the ideal would be a movie theater size screen that has absolutely perfect black levels. But at the moment, we pretty much have to choose one or the other. So for us, with IMAX movies at home and with changing aspect ratios, do we feel it's better to go with a projector for the sheer size, or better to go with an OLED so that there's no compromise to the contrast of the image when the black bars do show up?
Well, I mean, on just the pure what's available for us to buy side,
Yeah.
if 100 inches is big enough for you, and that's 100 inches 16 by 9, but if that's big enough for you and you have $25,000 to spend, you can get, 98-inch OLED. We got 98-inch OLEDs right now, and they're $25,000, but then you could have sheer size, up to 98 inches, 16 by 9, and perfect black levels so that when those black bars come up, they just completely blend into the black background. So just purely technically that exists. Yeah, I mean, this is the age-old question, right? Do you get a smaller screen with higher image quality and sit closer to it so that you still have the field of view that you want? Or do you just go for sheer size, knowing that either due to price or just technological limitation, there's going to be a little compromise on the quality side of things. For us, is it better to go with an OLED or compromise the contrast when the black bars show up? Yeah, I mean, look, in my theater, I'm sticking with a flat panel because I sit 6.5 feet away from my display, so I don't need a projector-sized screen. If I wouldn't want to, for IMAX, I don't want to compromise size. Like, that's the point of IMAX, right? The point of IMAX is like the sheer size of the thing, including the vertical, including that. So, like, given how good a JVC or like an Epson 5050 UB, is it OLED black? No. But given how good it is, like, if we go to the movie theater, right? If you go to an IMAX theater, when it changes aspect ratios during Oppenheimer, those top and bottom black bars are not going to be jet ink black.
Right.
Like, IMAX projectors can't do that.
That's right.
So you can actually have even better black levels and contrast at home on a projector than you would get in a commercial movie theater. It's not quite OLED, but it's not exactly some horrible earth-shattering compromise.
Yeah.
So I think if you've got the seating distance, I would go for the projector because we've got fantastic projectors that we can buy at home. And I would still always get a 16 by 9 screen, Gary. Always.
Yes, agreed. And for me, I just love, there's just, my whole point of having a home theater is to duplicate the movie theater experience.
As best we can.
And for whatever reason, the projector helps me with that.
Oh yeah. I see that.
Even if my black bars are gray, it just seems more like a theater.
We've got listeners who chide me for not having a projector. I'm like, I would have a projector if I had a bigger room and sat farther away. I'm not anti-projector.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you, I have a large flat panel in my theater because I sit 6.5 feet away.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Going back to the whole IMAX film camera thing, we mentioned how the cameras themselves were very large and noisy, and efforts are being made to manufacture new cameras that are smaller, lighter, and quieter. But for the older existing IMAX cameras, why couldn't they have been built or retrofitted to be quieter? Internal soundproofing or an optional outer case to make them quieter? Rob?
I mean, as far as I'm aware, because they're huge, already.
Yeah.
They're already huge.
They are.
And they do still need to be movable. Christopher Nolan discovered when he was doing the Batman movies or the Dark Knight movies that even just loading IMAX cameras onto cranes, like, they had to make physical changes to the cranes for the existing IMAX cameras. So if you're going to add even more weight and size to the ones that were already in existence, it literally just becomes unusable unless all you're doing are static shots. So I mean, a lot of it is purely that. It's just the physical weight and size of the things. Like, they basically made them as small and light as they could, which was huge and heavy and noisy.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, that's all. It was physical limitations. That's about all it was. Yeah.
All right.
So we're gonna end up going over 2 hours if you don't have a hard out. I would love to do Niels' question because it's on this sort of theme that we've had here. It's not super short, but I think we'll stop after that one.
Okay. Yeah, I've got as much time as you have.
Okay.
All right. So Niels, we're back to Niels, and we are also back to Aaron's audio corner.
That is exactly why I wanted to include it this week.
Some more discussion requests from having watched a video from Aaron's audio corner. Aaron posted a video titled "Why Flat In-Room Response Sucks." Aaron talks a bit about the Klippel near field scanner measurement system that he uses to closely approximate anechoic results, and how under those conditions it's a simple case of signal in versus signal out. So at least for the on-axis measurement, he wants to see as close to a perfectly flat response from the speaker as possible. Just play the signal exactly as it is being fed into the speaker. Nothing more, nothing less. Aaron then explains how, unless it's truly omnidirectional speakers, which is not typical, we should expect the off-axis measurements of the speaker to look different from the on-axis measurement. Makes sense. The deep bass will remain omnidirectional, but as we go higher and higher in frequency, the output of the speaker typically becomes more and more directional. So, when you bring a speaker that measures very flat on axis in an anechoic setting into a real room, and now you measure that in room with all of its walls, surfaces, and reflections, we won't get perfectly flat response anymore, even directly on axis. Okay, so Aaron says we should not apply EQ and then make the in-room measured response perfectly flat. The effects of the room are unavoidable, and they are different for the bass frequency. Okay, hang on. And they are different for the bass frequencies than they are for the higher frequencies. To Niels, that seems a bit at odds to what he would have expected. So, could we discuss that a bit to further clarify?
Yeah, so this is a tricky thing because the issue is that when you're taking a measurement with a microphone, the microphone does not hear the way a human hears. So we're going to take this on-axis measurement of the speaker. This is in-room now, right? We're going to put the speaker wherever it is in the room relative to the walls and the other surfaces. We're going to put the microphone in a location. We're going to take an on-axis measurement. And you're going to say, okay, I get this response back, even though this speaker measured perfectly flat anechoically. That shows a gradual rise as we go up in the bass. So if you want a little bit more detail about that, I talked about that in previous questions if you just skipped right down to this one. So there's been a theme throughout this whole episode, and you might want to go back because I'm not going to repeat everything here. But we see this, general gradual rise, and it's not steep. Some people think it's really steep. It's like 1-2 dB per octave at most. But just this general little rise. Now, why is that happening, right? So if you could go back to not measuring any of the reflections in the room, so we just really gate off the response really, really short so that there's no time for any reflections to reach the microphone, or we go back to an anechoic setting, you're back to the flat line again. Why do we get this rise in the bass? Well, because some of the reflection of that room, even in that on-axis measurement, there is a greater amount of bass frequency energy that reflected around the room and got to the microphone than high frequency energy, because the high frequency energy is predominantly like a straight line from the speaker to the microphone, whereas the bass that reaches the microphone is the straight line from the speaker to the microphone and the reflections that came there, because the way the speaker is radiating sound is not uniform from the highest frequency to the lower frequency. It's radiating more like a sphere down in the bass and more like a beam up in the high treble, unless you have a slightly unusually designed speaker, which Aaron mentioned. So you look at that response and you go, well, how does it sound to my human ears? Because if I do what Rob said, which is don't measure, just play a full frequency sweep and aim for that full frequency sweep. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but that needs to be with the full frequency sweep being played at 85 decibels at your seat. So that might be even louder 1 foot away from the speaker in front of it. 85 decibels at your seat, not for the speaker, but for your human hearing, because our human hearing is most linear at 85 decibels. So we're playing the sweep loud.
Yeah.
But when you listen to that, if you follow Rob's advice of, okay, it sounds uniform in volume now throughout that entire sweep, just listening to it with my ears at 85 decibels at the seat, I go back and measure it. Shouldn't it measure flat? It won't. I promise you it won't. And this is, again, what the microphone captures is not the same as your human perception of what you're hearing. So there's a couple of different sides to this. There is a purely visual and auditory mix in our brains that even if objectively the sound were completely uniform from top to bottom, reaching our ears, and that's all reflections and everything included, even if objectively that were the case, if we can see the room, our brain will force us to hear it differently. And again, this is one of those things, you can know it. You can know it in your human mind and say, I'm going to ignore that. You can't. And that goes back to the Harman research of like, you put people in real rooms, different speakers, what do they prefer, whether the room is treated, whether the room isn't treated. Like, you can't avoid the part of our brain that includes the visual aspect of it. We know when we're in a room versus in a wide open field with no walls around us. If the sound that reaches us doesn't match what we're seeing visually, our brain tells us something is wrong. It tells us it's fake, it tells us it's artificial, or it tells us that we're in danger in weird cases. Like, our brain will force us to believe that it's wrong. So when we're in a room, because we have lived our lives and we know that sound changes in rooms, but like, if you're familiar with your partner's voice, right? We could take you and your partner to different acoustic environments. And we measure your partner's voice, and on the graph, the measurement is different because you measured it in different rooms. But you would never say, I can't recognize my partner's voice. There you go. That's my partner's voice regardless of what room I'm in. But the objective microphone told you it's a different voice in each of those rooms. Like, it's not identical. You got a different measurement, and yet you, the human, goes, no, that's the same person. That's the same person in every room. What changed was the room, not the person. I know that. Right? So a similar thing happens to, you can have this ruler flat measurement from room to room to room. You will not hear it that way. Your brain will force you to hear a difference based on what room you're in. And it's like, it's just unavoidable. You can't get away from it. So this is why we can't listen to speakers through graphs. You can't do it, right? You can say, yeah, that's what the microphone picked up, but it's going to tell you that depending on what room you in, you were listening to a different speaker, essentially. Like, the measurement can't tell whether it was the room that changed or the speaker that changed, or the equalization that to the speaker. That all it can tell you is that this is a different graph from the other graph. That's all it can tell you. So if you're like, what I'm going to do is make all the graphs look the same. That's what I'm going to do. It is not going to sound the same to you, the human. And our end goal is for it to actually sound the same, right? We want the recording to sound like the same recording. We want the instrument to sound like the same instrument. If we have a favorite musician who, it's a violinist and they play a Stradivarius, we want to recognize that it's that musician playing their Stradivarius, regardless of which speakers or room we're in, which is a weird thing, right? Because you're going to say, well, then it should measure exactly the same no matter what we're doing. But for our human perception, that just isn't the case. It doesn't work. So this is something I actually forgot to mention, or left. I'll say I intentionally left it till now because I knew this question was coming up. Yeah. That whole thing about curtaining off your equalization so that you don't equalize the mid-range and treble, you only equalize the bass where the room really dominates everything that we hear, and only equalize that. One of the, I'm not even going to necessarily say it's subjective or experiential, it's almost more theoretical, right? One of the ideas there is that, yes, we want that musician's Stradivarius to sound like them playing that exact Stradivarius regardless of what room we're in. If we start equalizing all of those harmonics that tell us it's that musician with that Stradivarius and not somebody else, to recognize all of that, if we start equalizing all of that, it fuzzes all of that. It messes all of that up. We're saying, okay, even though speaker to speaker might not be identical, room to room, it definitely isn't identical. Seat to seat might not be identical. But I'm not going to mess with what's coming out of the speaker, because as long as this speaker measures anechoically very accurate, I know the speaker isn't messing with the sound. Signal in, signal out. Just like if I brought that musician with their Stradivarius, the person with the real life instrument, into my room, that's the sound that's coming out. What reaches me at my seat is going to depend on the room. It's going to depend on where I'm sitting. But it's them playing the sound. And so we want the speaker to play the sound. Now that goes to a whole other thing, which is there's at least two different kinds of recordings, right? Mm-hmm. There's the recording that is close mic'd, doesn't include any reflections in the recording, and what you're basically getting coming out of the speaker is I brought a replication of the original instrument into the room, and now the speaker is putting that sound out into my room. There's the other type of recording that was taken at a concert hall and includes all the reflections of the concert hall in the recording. It's not just the direct sound of the instrument alone being played by the speaker. It's that and all the reflections that the microphone picked up in the venue. Now what do you do, right? And since we tend to be a little bit more home theater centric as opposed to, straight, we talk about music, but we often focus on home theater. Home theater includes environmental sounds. It includes reflections in the recording that are either captured by their microphones on set or added in the soundtrack, right? And in those types of recordings, we aren't aiming to bring the spaceship into my little home theater. We're aiming to transform the sound of my home theater into the spaceship, right? We're trying to take me out of my theater and put me in a created environment rather than trying to bring a created object into my existing room. And that is a challenge. How do you do both, right? Yeah. How do you do both of those things? Well, the best we can do is have speakers that play the signal without changing the signal themselves, and then have a room that is uniform, at the very least uniform, so that the sounds are consistent no matter what's going on, right? We're not going to be able to do both perfectly because one would be headphones and the other one would be bringing the real life instrument in our rooms, and you can't really do both of those things with a speaker system. But we can have uniformity and accuracy coming from the speaker. And then we go back to what do the measurements describe, not prescribe? And we end up with this not a flat line at the microphone anymore. Yeah. And that's just the way it is. At the end of it, I can't explain it.
Yeah. All right. And Aaron pretty much always points out any humps or dips that show up in a speaker's in speakers. Aaron pretty much always points out.
There. Sorry.
I get it. Yeah. I just figured that out.
Lots of typos.
Aaron pretty much. That's all right. Aaron pretty much always points out any humps or dips that show up in a speaker's clipple measurements, and he discusses whether or not those humps and dips can be equalized. Mm-hmm. But in this flat does not equal flat video. He says that because the higher frequencies are predominantly determined by the speakers themselves, but the low frequencies are determined more by the room, we should really only apply room correction below about 400 to 500 hertz. Yeah. There we are with that again. And we should not be targeting a perfectly flat response. We should be targeting a rising response as the bass frequencies go lower and lower, to better match the natural response of a perfectly flat anechoic speaker that's now been put into a room. Yeah. Some of those statements just seem to be at odds with each other. Can we clarify and share our thoughts on the matter?
So, I think we've definitely already covered the lion's share of that, so I won't repeat it all again. But what the thing that was different here in particular was pointing out sometimes quite small humps and dips, like going back to that Aperion review where it was all within plus or minus 3 dB, but he pointed out these couple of humps that were in there, and this bit of a dip that you can see in the graph throughout the mid-range, but still only minus 3 dB at its worst. But, pointing those things out, saying where subjectively he thought they were audible, thought that they correlated with the measurements afterwards, all those types of things. And then, he does mention he particularly points out in that section of the graph that I mentioned where if it's basically just a straight line, that's indicating that on and off axis is quite uniform, so therefore you can EQ it very effectively, right? Whatever you change in one seat is also going to change in the other seats, not one goes up while another seat goes down. And saying, okay, so now you get a speaker, it doesn't measure anechoically flat, but it is very uniform, so you could equalize it, right? You could equalize that speaker so that because it's nice and uniform, now you can make it relatively flat as long as, within reason. But then saying, in general, we don't want to apply a lot of room correction below the transition frequency, maybe upwards of 400 or 500 hertz, which is probably above the transition frequency of the room, but still bass. Everything below 500 hertz is bass, and really only apply our room correction, our equalization to that section of it, and kind of leave the mid-range and treble alone. So I think where some of it was not perfectly clear exactly why the question is being asked is when he's saying don't use the room correction below the transition frequency of the room, he's saying if the speaker measures nice and anechoically flat.
Right.
Right. So if it doesn't, he's saying if it doesn't measure nice and anechoically flat, if it is equalizable, as in it has nice uniform response, then you can equalize the mid-range and treble closer to something that is anechoically flat. So it's almost like two separate things. Like that's saying there's going to be a manual EQ that it's not part of the room correction package, all right? It's not part of the auto EQ. It's not part of your Audyssey or Dirac or something like that. This is you're going in there with like a mini DSP and you're saying, this has nothing to do with the room. This is the speaker itself, anechoically, is not linear at whatever frequencies. So I'm going to go in there manually and linearize it as best as I can. Aaron is warning, don't do that if it isn't also uniform. Because if you do it and it's not uniform, well, then it's going to be linear in one location, but it's going to be something significantly different elsewhere. So basically, I think what's tripping up Niels is that there's a whole bunch of caveats in these statements that, look, Aaron is putting out YouTube videos and doing write-ups, and he's not necessarily going to repeat everything every single time. It's pretty difficult to do. And he's trying to make reasonable YouTube videos. He's not trying to make 2.5-hour episodes like we're doing over here. It's like, I want this to actually get into the algorithm and maybe get, recommended to people. So it's going to be closer to the 10 or 20 minute mark. So I completely understand all of that. So I think it's just a little bit of a misunderstanding, a perfectly reasonable mimisunderstanding, because they're like, on the face of it, those things just seem at all. He's talking about equalizing things in the mid-range and treble, and then saying, don't use your room correction anywhere above 400 or 500 hertz. So, I mean, all of that goes back to, again, I think a more theoretical side of things, right? Which is, we've got signal in, signal out. So if we needed to apply some manual EQ, and we're able to, because we have uniform response in the mid-range and treble, we get that back to anechoically flat there. Now we're reasonably certain that whatever the signal said to do, that's what the speaker sent out into the room. We know it's linear coming out of the speaker. We know it's uniform coming out of the speaker, or it's uniform reaching the seats. And we're not going to mess with that because we're going to have that psychoacoustic side of it, our eyes matching with our hearing and what we expect to hear in this room. We're going to have the human perception side of it, which is I don't change the piano when I take it from place to place. The room changes. It sounds different. The measurements will look different, but the piano stayed the same. So that's what I'm going to do with my speakers as well. All of that makes sense logically. And I don't really have a disagreement with any of it. I'm going to go all the way back to when we talked about, should I get that Audyssey editor app? Should I do anything with it? Right?
Yeah.
Because both of us agree, right? You can know all of this stuff. You can try to ignore some of it that our human brains won't let us ignore. You can worry about stuff that is plainly there on the graph. And then it's like at the end of it all, you just listen to your stuff. And it's amazing how not as precise in our hearing. And maybe we want to believe that we're way better at noticing little differences than we really are. But, and I'll just end the whole thing with my favorite part of all the Harman research is the part that they have never said, because they have only ever said, and the audience has only ever keyed in on, if you want to hear these differences, you got to listen in mono. Because that's the only way we can reliably, in a group of listeners, statistically speaking, have them consistently point out differences. And I'm like, well, the part that you didn't say is that if you don't listen in mono, people have a heck of a time telling stuff apart. That's my favorite part of the research, because that tells me, how often am I listening to one speaker in my home theater, or even just listening to music? How often am I listening to one speaker all by itself? I would argue virtually never. And the indication is, oh boy, could I change a lot of things more than I imagine I could, and I'm still not actually going to notice it.
Exactly.
That's my favorite part.
Yep.
Alrighty, so I think I will leave it on that happy note and mention that we have questions on the list from Adam and from Vince, and Lee Overstreet will be here next week, so we will tackle those first up then. So let's see here. Before I do the full sign-off and everything, Curt, thank you so much for being my guest co-host today.
My pleasure.
I hope you had fun. Did you have fun?
I did. I had a lot of fun.
Not that I let you talk very much, but that's no surprise.
That's fine with me.
So I hope everybody listening had a good time. Please leave happy comments for Curt, because I have no doubt that you will. And I will just go back up to the top here to thank our listeners of the week, people who supported this podcast in some way. And we thank you very much for doing so. Joe, who was my guest co-host last week, thank you for sending in a PayPal donation. And we agree avscience.com deserves props and your business if you're looking for anything that they do or sell. So we're happy to give them a shout out as well. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So we thank our 137 patrons over there. And Niels, thank you very much for being one of them since the very beginning that we even had.
I'm one of those too.
A Patreon. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you, Curt. That's coming up awfully late. Closing arguments, my man. Thank you very much, everybody, for the financial support. And big thank you as well for the notes of gratitude just for keeping the podcast going from Nick, Jay, and Niels. We super appreciate the emotional support, if nothing else. We can definitely use it these days. So with that, I shall just say, on behalf of Tom Andry and for AVRant, I'm Rob H.
And I'm Curt G. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.